Alright, before we get too far, I'd like to apologize. This is mostly a slideshow. This is all photos and video clips that I found in my archives of a project that I did over 5 years ago. There's going to be stuff in here that I explain that I don't have pictures of, but I'm doing the best I can from the archives. Thanks for watching. Everybody wants a boat on a budget. Well, my budget wasn't quite enough to afford this boat. I mean, you want a fast boat. It doesn't have to be a really fast boat, but it's got to get you where you want to go in a reasonable amount of time. So what you're probably going to end up with is probably not going to be exactly like what I've got here. It's going to be more like what I started with, which is this. Yeah, this is what I started with about 6 years ago. I know they say beauty is only skin deep, but man, does this skin run almost all the way to the core. But this boat had one thing that I was looking for. It had that ugly little V6 sitting in the back of it. And that's what I was looking for. Something that would push the boat across the water at a reasonable speed. Everything else I figured I could do on my own. Yeah, fiberglass work. Oh man, what fun I was going to have. After a test run showed me it would do 50 miles an hour just the way it was, I found a couple seats out of another boat, threw those in there, and if you notice in this picture, you can see the upholstery in the front was redone. So you'd actually have something to sit on. I enjoyed the boat for the rest of the summer, and then, well, with fall rapidly approaching, I figured it'd be a good time to take the boat apart, see what I had, find out how bad it was. That's where the driver's side seat was bolted to. Ain't nothing left of that floor. Turned out the floor was soft. A lot of stringers needed to be replaced. Fuel lines were in bad shape, so I replaced those. After pulling out the fuel tank and finding out how bad the stringers around the fuel tank actually were, with all the floor out of the way, I could see the stringers alongside the motor mounts. Those had to be replaced. And once you realize how big of an undertaking it is, of course, the motor has to come out to get out of your way. The drive has to come off the back of it, and as long as the drive is coming off, you might as well build a stand to put the drive on because, well, there's no sense leaving it laying around, rolling around on the ground somewhere. Yeah, it's true. I'm the king of making extra work for myself. This is looking forward at the ski locker area. The stringers here are solid, so I was able to keep those. But if you look all the way up in the front of the ski locker, there's an area of fiberglass that the original builders left hang down. I was never able to get skis all the way up inside of there, so I ended up reaching all the way up in there one-handed and cutting most of that out of the way. At least I can get skis in there now. Once all the floor was out, then I just had to clean up all the edges, clean out all the rotten wood, and cut the old stringers out of the way that needed to be replaced. If you look at the stringers in this picture, you can see that the stringer does not actually touch the bottom of the boat. The stringer is still solid, the fiberglass is solid, but there's a gap just about all the way along that stringer at the bottom edge of the boat, and the fiberglass wasn't laid tight in the corners. What I did was temporarily fiberglassed a small tube, about a ½ inch inside diameter, into the stringer after I got the new stringers put in, so that I could pour epoxy resin into that gap. I drilled a small hole at the back end so the air could flow out and just poured those full from end to end. The stringers are way solider now than they originally were. I did the same thing with the motor mounts once the new stringers were put in and fiberglassed in place. Drilled a hole at the highest point, temporarily fiberglassed a short tube into it, set a funnel on top of it, poured epoxy resin in, drilled a couple small holes where the air could come out in different spots, and then when the epoxy would start flowing out of it, I'd slap a piece of duct tape over the top of it and put a block on it to hold it down. It worked real good, filled it all the way to the top. So like I said, the stringers and the motor mounts are solider than they were in the original boat. Drawing out patterns and cutting the stringers to shape. All of the stringers have doublers around this area. They're all the fuel tank lip. The original boat just had a single lip on it. I don't know how they figured they were going to hold up a fuel tank lid with that, but I thought it'd be better to put doublers on it. So everything's doubled. Once it's glued into place, it's fiberglassed over to keep all the moisture out of it. Some of it's fiberglassed over before I put it in, but most of it was fiberglass and tabbed in after it was glued down. You'll notice drain holes and ventilation holes everywhere. After I took this boat apart and started tearing stringers out of it, water drained out of this foam for weeks, and I'm not joking when I say weeks. I mean gallons and gallons of water drained out of the foam. At the back, near the engine mounts, I decided to drill a hole underneath the stringer. You can see the tubes running under through it. Run tubes through that and fiberglass those tubes into it. The tubes were later cut flush on both ends. Now any water that does find its way through the fiberglass into these locations can drain its way down into the bilge. And the motor mount stringer was fiberglass to the motor mount after it was glued to the hull along the bottom and the stringers at the front and the transom at the rear. After all the stringers were in place and things were getting fiberglassed in, it was time to cut the floor out and do a first fit of the floor. See, I told you skis would fit in a ski locker now. After the plywood was cut to shape and fitted, it was fiberglassed on the bottom side. If you look at the left side of the picture, you can see a tab was added to the bottom of the floor because the floor is done in two pieces. There's a forward section and a rear section. You'll see the splices in later pictures. With plenty of weight added, that's what all the bricks are in the boat. Therefore, the floor is epoxied to the stringers and then epoxy filled all the way around the outer edges. Once the epoxy cured, then the floor is tabbed with a piece of fiberglass tape all the way around the outside edge before it is finally fiberglassed over the top of the complete floor. I almost forgot about the seats and the seat bases. The seat bases are a piece of 3/4 marine grade plywood that actually has nut plates run through the bottom of it. The bases, once they're cut to shape, are epoxy resined to the floor with a sheet of fiberglass in between them. The screws do not penetrate into the original floor. They only go through the seat base, and they're held by nut plates. I don't think this will ever rot out or ever let the seat fall off in the rest of the lifetime of this boat. The other thing was the placement of the steering wheel on the original boat. You could almost sit in the seat and get your legs under the steering wheel. The original builders of this boat didn't really care about that. All they cared about is selling a boat real quick, I guess. It took a little bit of work, but I was able to raise the steering wheel up a few inches and get it to where it was comfortable to sit behind the steering wheel. All right, since I took all the time to put this together so far, I figured I'd show you what it looks like and maybe show you a couple things that I don't have pictures of while I was working on it. This is a shot from the beautiful scenic waterway known as my driveway. And it's hot. Oh man, is it hot. Anyway, the last thing we talked about, I think, was the seat pedestals that were put in and raising the steering wheel slightly. So there's the seat pedestal. And I haven't done any finish work on the bottom of this yet, but this is a raised steering wheel. And as you can see, you can actually get your legs under it now. Where it was at before was down here. The floor to hull join, that's a couple layers thick. I can't remember how many layers I laid up in there of the narrow woven cloth. There's the seam from the old floor to the new floor. The old floor was solid forward of this. My bow seating, all of this cushion work was done just by folding it over and then stapling it on the bottom just to get it good to go. And it has stayed that way since then. The only seat that I've actually redone is this one right here. Anchor storage up front. Also in the back for the battery, I did the same thing. I fiberglassed another piece of plywood on top of the original plywood so that the battery box is screwed to that piece of plywood and not through the main deck. Also the trim pump, I mounted that on a pedestal so that it's not screwed into the original deck. These blocks here from when I used the original motor cover when I first started using the boat again, before I put this cover on it. normal storage on that side, and over here are these green storage container and a toolbox. The rear seat box, these are Harbor Freight plastic ammo boxes. I just put a small towel in the bottom of them and people can throw their stuff in there instead of using the glove compartment, which is real deep and you tend to have to dig all the way down to the bottom. This cooler, I just happened to find this while I was building the boat in a store. Didn't even know they existed. The reason for the cutouts is because it is now long enough to hold two of those coolers, one on either side on the outside if I want to, and use the middle as storage, so I can have two coolers in there or just one in the middle. Also, I can move that back and forth to change weight around if the boat tended to lean one way or the other. But from running it and stuff, I found out that it runs leveler with the battery on that side, so not too concerned with that. This seat box is not glued to the floor. It just sits on the floor. It's held in with that bolt right there, screwed into a nut plate, the same as everything else. It's screwed into a piece of plywood epoxy to the floor, and then this nut just tightens down against that washer to hold it down. I set it up so it could have two, but one is plenty to hold it down. And this right here is my boarding plank. You just take the seat cushion off and put this on in its place so that you got something that you can step on that isn't going to fall off too easy. And then when you're not using it, just drop it in there or wherever you want to drop it at. Dash switches still need to be redone. The original rubber handle on this started turning soft, so that's actually a piece of wood. It's just carved out to fit, and then it's got a black RTV silicone holding it on there. It works great. Better than buying a whole new handle. Here's how the side panels turned out. Let's look at the side panel in the light. There's the covers for the rear seat. New tires. Yeah, I think I mentioned that it's hot out here. I'm going inside to do a little editing. I don't know why, but a tour of the bilge area. This is the port side motor mount. This is the fuel tank lid at the aft edge. Fuel tank lines going into the fuel tank. Forward bilge. The fuel line coming out of the fuel tank going to the motor and the starboard motor mount. Another shot of the starboard motor mount. This is the bilge looking aft. The little blue rag there is to wick out the last little bit of water. And that is the drain lines that I put through the stringers to drain the last little bit of water out of the stringers that was trapped in the foam on the original build. Would I do it again? I don't know about that. Was it worth it? Yes, it was really worth it. This boat came a long ways from what it was. It is a lot of fun to take out on the water. Just like with any other boat, every once in a while there's a failure, but man, does it run nice. It runs smooth, clean, tilt, trim, throttle, shift linkage, all works really nice on it. It's just great to be out there on the water with something that works as well as this boat does. And I know that this boat will last. The boat will last longer than the motor and the drive will now. And while the drive was out, everything was taken apart and resealed. New gimbal bearing, new bellows. Should last a long time. Just got to keep up with the maintenance and the washing and the waxing. Well, that's it for this one. Alright, like, subscribe, share, leave a comment. And as always, thanks for watching.